When two cops stopped a man outside his own home, they thought they had everything under control. They wrecked his car, humiliated him, and slapped on the cuffs, never once questioning if they had the wrong target. But the moment he spoke 5 words, their confidence turned into pure panic. The night pressed down on the street like a heavy hand, thick with humidity and silence. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was loaded, like the air before a thunderstorm. A black BMW sat under the streetlight, its sleek surface reflecting the flickering glow of its own busted headlights. The once pristine hood was now dented and cracked, like a wound left open. The faint scent of gasoline lingered in the air, mixing with burnt rubber and something else, something almost metallic. Then came the sound. Boots. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that let you know trouble was right behind them. Hands on the hood, now. The words weren't barked in urgency. They were slow, dripping with something worse than aggression, certainty, like the cop already knew exactly how this night was going to play out. Elias Carter stood still, his heartbeat pounding against his ribcage, but his face remained calm. Years of discipline, years of knowing when to speak and when to hold back. He wasn't some reckless young man who didn't know how this game was played. No, he knew. And that's what made it worse. He had pulled up to his own home barely a minute ago. His navy blue suit was still crisp, his tie only slightly loosened from the long workday. The leather briefcase in his hand held legal documents, not contraband. And yet, here he was. He should have heard them coming. The way they approached wasn't normal. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a creeping kind of hostility. And now they were standing in front of him, their batons still warm from smashing up his car. Elias's eyes flicked over the two officers. One was tall and broad, built like a linebacker, his square jaw locked tight, like he was waiting for an excuse to use his fists. The other was lean and wiry, with a shock of red hair and a grin that didn't belong on a man with a badge. The kind of grin that said, "I enjoy this." "There's been a misunderstanding," Elias said, keeping his voice measured. Calm, controlled. "Misunderstanding?" The redhead cocked his head like he was amused. "Oh yeah? You misunderstood that you weren't supposed to be in this neighborhood, huh?" There it was. The reason he was standing here. The reason his car had been turned into a punching bag for police-issued batons. Because a black man in a nice car in a quiet neighborhood? That was suspicious. "This your car?" the square-jawed cop asked, though he wasn't really asking. His tone was flat, like he already knew the answer, or had decided what it was. "Yes." Elias exhaled slowly, forcing his jaw to stay loose. "And I live here." The officers shared a glance, just a flicker of exchanged looks, but Elias caught it. He knew that look, the silent conversation that said, "He's lying," or worse, "Doesn't matter if he's telling the truth. I can show you my registration, my ID. How about you shut up and do what you're told?" The redhead cut him off, already moving toward the driver's side. Before Elias could react, the officer swung his baton again. Crack! The rear taillight shattered, sending jagged pieces of glass skittering across the pavement. Elias felt the heat of anger rise up so fast, it nearly burned through his restraint. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The redhead turned, baton still raised, that grin still in place. Looking for contraband." Elias stared at him. "In the tail light?" The cop just shrugged. "You'd be surprised where y'all hide things." Y'all. There it was again. The casual, smirking assumption, like he was just another criminal, just another black man who didn't belong. Elias' fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to say something, do something. But he knew better. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking for an excuse. "You have no right to do this," Elias said finally, his voice like stone. Squarejaw let out a short, sharp laugh. "Yeah? You resisting?" And that was the moment Elias knew exactly how this was about to go down. He wasn't being questioned. He wasn't being investigated. He was being provoked. The cuffs were already in the redhead's hand. They had decided this before they even saw his face. Elias took a deep breath, because this wasn't going to end the way they thought. Across the street, a porch light flickered on. A shadow moved behind a curtain, a neighbor peeking out. It was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly white woman who had lived there for years. Her frail fingers gripped the fabric of the curtain. Her lips parted, like she might say something. But then the red-haired cop turned, and the second their eyes met, she disappeared. The curtain dropped. The porch light clicked off. She saw, and she chose silence. Elias swallowed down the bitter taste of reality. The flashing lights of his destroyed BMW kept flickering, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. This wasn't just about a car. It wasn't about paperwork or rules or justice. This was a message. You don't belong here, and if you forget that, we'll remind you. The grip on Elias's shoulder was rough, yanking him down with a force that sent shockwaves through his body. He barely had time to react before his knee hit the pavement with a dull thud. "You deaf?" The redhead's voice was sharp, coated in arrogance. Elias gritted his teeth, his muscles locked up, not from fear but from rage. "Down, now!" Elias knew how this played out. He had seen it before, on the news, in court cases, in the stories of men who never got their chance to fight back. The moment you resisted, even with words, they made sure you regretted it, so he stayed still. He clenched his fists and planted himself firmly on the ground, staring straight ahead like he wasn't kneeling in front of his own damn house. Squarejaw moved toward the car, popping open the driver's side door with an ease that made it clear he wasn't looking for permission. The officer leaned inside, running his hands over the dashboard, patting the seats like he was searching for a prize. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled open the glove compartment, tossing papers and personal belongings onto the floor like they meant nothing. Elias forced himself to breathe. Then the redhead leaned down, real close, voice dripping with mockery. "Go ahead. Make this easy for yourself. Where's the stuff?" Elias blinked. The stuff? Excuse me? His voice was like steel, but inside. Inside, he was boiling. The officer smirked, nudging him with the toe of his boot. "Uh-huh. Oh, come on, man. Don't play dumb. Where's the stash?" Elias' head snapped toward him. "You've got to be kidding me." Squarejaw, who was now ripping up the backseat upholstery like a man on a mission, grunted. "They always act surprised, don't they?" Elias exhaled through his nose, hard. How many times had he seen this exact moment in court? How many times had men like these walked in, heads high, knowing that whatever they did on the street wouldn't follow them inside a courtroom? He knew their game. They didn't need evidence. They just needed a narrative, and they were building one right now. The redhead crouched lower. "Don't make me ask again. Where's the stash?" Elias turned his head slowly, looking him dead in the eye. "There is no stash." The cop's smirk didn't falter. If anything, it got wider. "Tied. Oh, we know how this works. First, you act all offended. Then, you make us prove it. Then, we find something, and suddenly, oops." Elias' jaw locked. "You don't even know who I am." The redhead laughed. Not the kind of laugh that meant amusement, the kind that meant he didn't care. "And I don't need to." Then, before Elias could react, the grip on his wrist tightened. The snap of metal against his skin was swift, cold, tight, unforgiving. The handcuffs bit into his wrists as Squarejaw yanked his arms behind his back with zero regard for comfort. Elias hissed through his teeth, not from pain, from the sheer disrespect of it. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one. Shadows moved behind windows. Neighbors were watching, but nobody was moving. Nobody was stepping outside. Nobody was asking why a man in a tailored suit was being forced into cuffs outside of his own damn house. Because they already had their answer. Elias felt his pulse in his throat. Humiliation or escalation. That was the choice. And as the officers dragged him toward the car, he realized they had no idea who they had just put in cuffs. Elias closed his eyes for just a second, just long enough to pull himself back from the edge of his own frustration, just long enough to remind himself that anger, no matter how justified, would not help him right now. His breath was slow, but his heart pounded against his ribs. He could still feel the sting of the pavement on his knees, the metal cuffs cutting into his wrists. His car, his own damn car, was sitting there wrecked, torn apart for no reason other than the assumptions these two men had made the moment they saw him. And then, in a voice as smooth as steel, he said it. "I am a federal judge." Silence. Not just the awkward kind. Not just the kind that happens when people don't know what to say. No, this was the kind of silence that meant lives had just changed. Squarejaw, still gripping the cuffs, froze mid-motion. Redhead, who had been standing over him like a man in control of the entire universe just seconds ago, suddenly wasn't so sure of himself. Elias didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break eye contact. He wanted to watch them process this. Squarejaw flinched first. His hand twitched toward his holster, reflex, before he caught himself. Redhead looked like he had just been hit in the face with a shovel. Twice. "What?" The word came out shaky. Elias exhaled through his nose, voice calm, controlled. "You heard me." The younger cop swallowed hard. His fingers loosened on the cuffs, like he wasn't sure if he should be touching them anymore. Squarejaw shot a glance at his partner, like maybe, just maybe, he had misheard. No way," Redhead muttered under his breath. Elias tilted his head. "Oh way." His voice had weight now, the kind of weight that only came from knowing exactly how much power you held, and they knew it too. Elias shifted his shoulders just slightly, making the cuffs rattle against his wrists, a not-so-subtle reminder of the position they had put him in. "You just detained a federal judge," he said, voice like a blade. "You destroyed my personal property. You arrested me outside my own home, without cause." He let that last part sit in the air for a moment, let it breathe. The cicadas in the trees had gone dead silent. Even the wind had stopped. "Please tell me this is a joke," Squarejaw finally muttered. Elias turned his head toward him, slow and deliberate. Do I look like I'm laughing?" Redhead took an actual step back, a full instinctive step backward. His pupils were blown wide, his face blank with panic, like someone had just yanked the floor out from under him, because this was career-ending. Elias watched them both, his face betraying nothing. Then, with agonizing slowness, he shifted his wrists just enough for his tailored jacket to pull back. And there it was, a gold badge, a federal ID, his entire identity shoved right in their faces. Squarejaw actually stopped breathing. Redhead's mouth opened like he wanted to say something, like he wanted to explain or backpedal, but there was nowhere left to run. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The two officers locked eyes. Panic, not just concern, not just regret. No, this was real, gut-wrenching panic, the kind that only set in when a person fully realized they had just wrecked their own future. Redhead's face had gone ghostly pale. The smug arrogance, gone. That confident stance, gone. Now, he looked like a man watching his life flash before his eyes. Squarejaw wasn't much better. His chest was rising and falling too fast, his eyes darting between Elias and his partner, like he was waiting for someone to wake him up from this nightmare. Elias saw it happen, the moment it clicked, the moment they realized this wasn't going to disappear. Redhead spoke first. Listen, this is just a misunderstanding, sir. We didn't know." Elias let out a low chuckle, not the kind that meant amusement, the kind that meant, "Are you serious?" "Oh, now I'm sir." The officers flinched. Elias shifted his shoulders just slightly, and the asterisk cuffs. Asterisk, they're asterisk cuffs. Asterisk slid lower down his wrists. He didn't need to struggle, didn't need to pull. Just that small movement alone was enough to make them visibly uneasy. He tilted his head slightly, eyes locked on Redhead. What's wrong? These cuffs don't feel right now that you know whose wrist they're on." Neither of them spoke, not a single word. Elias exhaled slowly. He wasn't the kind of man to yell. He didn't need to. Power wasn't about how loud you were. It was about presence. And right now, he owned this moment. His gaze burned into them, steady, unwavering. Let me get this straight." He spoke slow, deliberate, like he was giving them one last chance to feel the weight of their mistake. "You smashed my car. You shoved me to the ground. You searched my belongings without cause. You humiliated me. And now—" He lifted his brows, voice dipping into something dangerously calm. "Now, it's just a misunderstanding?" Squarejaw actually took a step back. Elias let his eyes drift between them, giving them time to sit with their own disgrace. Redhead tried again, his voice shaky, words tumbling out too fast. "Sir, we had no idea. No. Elias cut him off with a flick of his fingers, gesturing between them. "You had plenty to say before. Plenty of confidence. Plenty of authority." He tilted his head. "Where did it all go?" Silence. The kind that strangled the air. The kind that made the night feel heavier. The street, the houses, the entire world felt like it had gone still. Because they knew. They knew they weren't walking away from this the way they'd walked away from so many other nights like this. Elias let the moment stretch. Let them sit in their own failure. Then he spoke again, clear as day. "I won't forget this." The words landed like a hammer. Redhead swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed. Squarejaw's fingers twitched at his sides, like he wanted to do something. Fix this, erase it, make it go away. "Sir, can we just talk about this?" Redhead's voice had none of its previous bravado. Elias glanced at his car, at the shattered headlights, the torn interior, his briefcase still lying in the dirt. Then finally he turned back to them and smiled. "Too late." The two officers stood stiff, barely breathing, as the deep, guttural growl of an approaching engine shattered the heavy silence. A black SUV, sleek, unmarked, and undeniably official, glided up to the curb. The low hum of its motor felt like the final toll of a bell, a warning, a sentence, a reckoning. The tinted windows reflected the flashing police lights, warping the image of two men who had walked onto the street with unchecked power and were now standing there like defendants awaiting a verdict. The door swung open. A man in a perfectly pressed suit stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. His stride was controlled, purposeful, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who answered to no one. The officers stiffened. They already knew. This wasn't backup for them. This wasn't someone coming to smooth things over. This was for Elias. The suited man didn't even acknowledge the two officers, didn't spare them a single glance. They weren't important anymore. His focus was on Elias, only Elias. "Judge Carter, we were informed of the situation. Are you all right?" Judge. The weight of that single word slammed into the two officers like a freight train. Redhead's jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked a tooth. Squarejaw's fingers twitched at his sides like he was fighting the instinct to run. Elias didn't answer right away. He let the moment stretch. Let them stand there and absorb what was happening. Let them feel the walls closing in. Then, with a slow exhale, he lifted his chin, squared his shoulders, and finally spoke. "Now, yeah, I'm good." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final. The two officers visibly withered under the weight of those words. Their confidence had drained out completely, leaving behind nothing but pure desperation. Redhead was the first to break. His lips trembled as he spoke, his voice thinner now, weaker. "Sir, we can explain." Elias turned his head toward him. He didn't frown, didn't scowl, didn't even look angry, just studied him. The way he and his partner had stood over him minutes ago, full of power, full of arrogance, full of the belief that there would be no consequences. He let them see themselves reflected in his eyes, and then, finally, he delivered the final blow. "You'll explain it in court." Squarejaw inhaled sharply, like someone had punched the air from his lungs. Redhead staggered back a half step. The suited man gave a small nod, a silent command that didn't need explaining, and just like that, it was over. Two uniformed officers stepped forward, and suddenly, the power dynamic flipped. 5 minutes. That's all it took. 5 minutes later, the same officers who had shoved Elias to the pavement were being led toward a squad car, hands behind their backs, not holding cuffs this time, wearing them. Elias watched in silence as they were guided inside, their faces drained of color, their world falling apart in real time. Then, at last, he turned back toward his car. The shattered headlights flickered, their broken glass catching the streetlight like shards of truth finally exposed. His reflection stared back at him in the dented hood, a man who had just reminded them of something they had long forgotten. Justice doesn't ask for permission,